He saw the flames before he saw her face. A woman trapped in a burning car, crying for help, and he didn't think twice. He broke the glass, dragged her out, saving her life. But what he didn't know was that the woman he saved was the same woman who left him as a baby 27 years ago. This isn't just a story about fate. It's about forgiveness, family. And the kind of love that survives even after decades of pain. Stay with us, because by the end, you'll believe in miracles again. Rain slid across the windshield like silver tears, turning the Atlanta streets into rivers of reflection. The night was heavy, quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your chest. Malik Johnson gripped the steering wheel of his old, dented Ford pickup, its wipers squeaking in protest. He'd just finished another 12-hour shift at the auto shop. His hands smelled of oil, his clothes of sweat and rubber. It had been another long day fixing cars that would never be his, cars that belonged to people who never even looked at him twice. He wasn't bitter. Not anymore. Malik had learned early that life didn't owe him kindness. He grew up in foster homes, passed from one house to another like luggage no one claimed. The only thing that stayed constant was the hum of engines, the one place where things made sense. As he drove, the radio played softly, an old blues tune. He hummed along, tapping the steering wheel. The rain had slowed, but the roads were slick. Up ahead, headlights glared too bright. A white Lexus SUV swerved, its tires screaming. Malik's eyes widened. "Whoa, whoa!" he muttered, slamming his brakes. The car spun, sliding across the divider and crashing into a tree with a deafening boom. The impact echoed through the empty street. Sparks danced. Flames flickered. Malik's heart pounded. He froze for half a second, then instincts took over. He threw open his door, rain soaking through his jacket instantly. Hey! Hey, are you okay?" The car door was jammed. Smoke hissed from under the hood. The smell of gasoline filled the air. People always say you should wait for help, but Malik couldn't just stand there. He pulled his jacket sleeve over his mouth and kicked the glass. Once. Twice. On the third hit, it shattered. Inside, a woman was slumped over the steering wheel, her hair long and streaked with gray. Blood trickled from her forehead. The airbag had deployed, deflating beside her like a ghost. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Malik shouted, coughing through the smoke. No response. He reached in carefully, unlocking the door, dragging her out as the flames spread from the hood toward the front seat. His arm brushed against the fire. It burned, but he didn't stop. He carried her away from the car, his boots splashing through puddles. Within seconds, the SUV exploded behind them, lighting up the street like daylight. Malik shielded her body with his own. He could feel her faint heartbeat against his chest. She was alive. Sirens wailed in the distance. Help was coming. He laid her gently on the sidewalk, his voice trembling. "Stay with me, okay? Just stay with me." Her eyelids fluttered. For a moment, she opened her eyes, brown, deep, familiar somehow. She whispered something too soft to hear. Malik leaned closer. "What was that?" Her lips moved again, this time a little louder. "Don't let go." And then she passed out. When the paramedics arrived, Malik told them everything. They rushed her onto a stretcher, loading her into the ambulance. One of them asked if he was family. Malik hesitated, but something in his gut told him to say yes. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I'll follow you." The ambulance pulled away, sirens slicing through the night. Malik ran back to his truck shaking, adrenaline still burning through his veins. He followed behind them, headlights cutting through fog, wondering why he couldn't shake this strange feeling, that this woman wasn't just some stranger. At the hospital, Malik sat in the waiting room, clothes damp, hands trembling. The nurse at the desk said the woman's name was Grace Adams. He stared at the name on the clipboard. Something about it echoed in his mind, like a song he'd forgotten the words to. Grace Adams? Where had he heard that before? He leaned back in the chair, rubbing his temples, unaware that fate, quiet, patient, and deliberate, had just brought him face to face with the one person he'd spent his entire life wondering about. And in a hospital room down the hall, the woman he just rescued was breathing, alive, but broken, clutching the same cross pendant she'd worn every day since the night she gave her son away. The son she thought she'd never see again. The fluorescent lights in the hospital hummed quietly, filling the hallways with a soft, sterile glow. Malik sat in the waiting area, his head bowed, his rough hands clasped together. He hadn't moved in hours. His jacket still smelled faintly of smoke. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the flash of the explosion, and her face. The nurse at the front desk, a kind woman named Nurse Ellie, approached him with a clipboard. "She's stable," Ellie said gently. "You saved her life, young man. Another few seconds and it could have gone the other way." Malik exhaled, tension leaving his body all at once. "Thank God." Ellie smiled. "Her name's Grace Adams. You said you weren't family, right?" He hesitated. "No, I'm not. I just couldn't leave her there." Ellie tilted her head. "You've been here all night. Most strangers don't wait this long." Malik shrugged, eyes still on the floor. "Maybe I just didn't want her to wake up alone." The next morning, Malik came back with a cup of coffee and a small bouquet of wildflowers he'd picked from a nearby lot. He left them by her bedside, awkwardly tucking a note between them that said, "For the lady I pulled from the fire. Wishing you a fast recovery." He didn't sign his full name. He didn't know why. Maybe he wanted to stay invisible, like always. Grace lay unconscious, breathing slowly, her right arm wrapped in bandages. There was something about her, even in sleep, that radiated strength. Her face, though bruised, carried a quiet grace, like someone who had endured storms before this one. Malik stood there for a while, just looking at her. He whispered, "Who are you, Grace Adams?" By the third day, she woke up. The nurse found Malik sitting in the hallway, and said softly, "She's awake." She asked for the man who saved her. Malik walked in, nervous. Grace was sitting up, a soft hospital blanket draped over her lap. Her eyes, calm but weary, lifted toward him. "You," she said, voice raspy. "You're the one who pulled me out." He nodded shyly. "Yeah. Lucky timing, I guess." Grace studied him. There was something in his face that tugged at her memory, the curve of his jaw, the kindness in his eyes. It hit her so suddenly she gasped. "You remind me of someone," she whispered. Malik smiled faintly. "Maybe I just have one of those faces." But inside, something stirred. It wasn't the first time someone had told him that. And the way she said it, like she'd seen a ghost, made him uneasy. They talked for a while. Grace thanked him over and over. She told him she lived outside the city, that she'd been driving that night to meet someone important. "A private investigator," she said. "He was supposed to give me news about my son." Malik froze mid-sentence. Her son. He tried to sound casual. "Your son?" Grace nodded, a sad smile touching her lips. "I lost him almost 30 years ago. I've been searching for him my entire life. I thought maybe this time." Her voice cracked. Malik felt something tighten in his chest. He didn't know what to say. He'd grown up without parents, without answers. And now here was this woman, searching for the child she'd lost. He forced a small smile. "Maybe you'll find him soon." Grace looked at him deeply. "Maybe I already have." He chuckled awkwardly, but the air between them turned still, heavy with something unspoken. Over the next few days, Malik found reasons to stop by. He'd bring her soup from the cafeteria or help adjust her pillow. Sometimes they'd talk for hours, about music, food, or how much Atlanta had changed. Grace told him she used to love cooking gumbo and collard greens for her son when he was a baby. "He had the biggest laugh," she said softly. "He'd giggle whenever I sang to him. I still remember the way he smelled after a bath, like cocoa butter and sunshine." Malik smiled, eyes glassy. "Sounds like he was lucky." Grace shook her head. "No. I was the lucky one, until I lost him. One evening, while Malik was about to leave, Nurse Ellie pulled him aside. She's been asking about you a lot, Ellie said. I think you give her hope. Maybe it's good for both of you. That night, Malik couldn't sleep. He sat in his small apartment, staring at the note Grace had written him that afternoon. Thank you for saving me. You have a heart like my son's. He turned it over and read it again. That name, Grace Adams, kept echoing. Where had he heard it before? He rummaged through an old shoebox in his closet, the one thing he'd carried from foster home to foster home. Inside were a few crumpled papers, a photo of him as a baby, and a faded hospital tag with the name Grace A. written in smudged ink. His breath caught. Could it be? The next morning, he went back to the hospital early. Grace was awake, sipping tea by the window. He sat down and said quietly, Ms. Adams, can I ask something? She smiled. Of course. What was your son's name? Grace hesitated, eyes softening. Malik, she whispered. His name was Malik. He froze. His throat tightened. The room blurred. Grace didn't notice his reaction. She continued, voice trembling. I named him after his grandfather. Strong name. He would have been around your age now, I think. Malik forced a weak smile, heart racing. Yeah, that's a good name. He stood up abruptly, muttering. I need some air. He stepped into the hallway, his pulse thundering in his ears. Was it a coincidence? Or had fate truly brought him to this woman? That night, as the city lights blinked beyond the hospital glass, Malik sat in the parking lot, staring at his hands, the same hands that had pulled Grace from the fire. He whispered to himself. Grace Adams. Malik Johnson. 2 names. One impossible connection. And deep down, he already knew. The woman he'd saved wasn't just a stranger. She was the beginning of his story. The morning sun crawled through the blinds, painting long shadows across Malik's small apartment. He hadn't slept. The sound of Grace's voice. His name was Malik, kept replaying in his head like a broken record. He sat on the edge of his bed, elbows on his knees, staring at the faded hospital tag he found in the shoebox. Grace A. He'd carried that tag his whole life without knowing who it belonged to. Now, for the first time, it had a face. And that face was the woman he'd pulled from a burning car. Malik rubbed his eyes, unsure if the universe was cruel or kind. How could the same night that nearly took her life be the one that reunited them? But then again, wasn't that how life always worked, breaking you before it blessed you? At the hospital, Nurse Ellie greeted him with her usual warm smile. She's been asking about you again, she teased. Malik forced a grin. Yeah, I figured. He walked into Grace's room. She looked better. Her color had returned, her smile softer now. When she saw him, her face lit up. You came back. Malik pulled up a chair. Couldn't stay away. They talked for hours again. About simple things, music, childhood dreams. Grace told him how she used to dream of finding her son every Mother's Day. I used to buy a little cupcake, light a candle, and pray that wherever he was safe, she said, voice breaking. Malik swallowed hard. You never stopped looking? Not for a day, she replied. I couldn't. You don't stop loving someone just because they're gone. He looked at her hands, soft but scarred. The kind of hands that had worked hard and held pain. Something inside him cracked open. Later that evening, Malik found Nurse Ellie by the counter. He lowered his voice. Hey Ellie, do you know if the hospital can do a DNA test? Ellie raised a brow. You think she might be family? Malik hesitated. I just need to know. For peace of mind. Ellie looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. I can help you. But keep it between us. She took 2 swabs, one from Grace's last blood sample, and one from Malik's cheek. Results will take a few days, she said quietly. As Malik left, his heart felt heavy. He wanted it to be true, but also feared what it would mean. That night, He sat in his truck outside the hospital, rain starting to fall again, just like the night of the crash. He pulled out the little note Grace had written. "You have a heart like my son's." He smiled bitterly. "Maybe because I am him," he whispered. He didn't tell her about the DNA test. Not yet. He didn't want to build her hope and break it if he was wrong. But every day he visited, it got harder to pretend. Grace started to open up more. She told him about the man she once loved, a young white businessman whose family didn't approve of their relationship. "They told him to choose between his inheritance or me," she said softly. "And he chose the money." Malik clenched his jaw. "He just left you." Grace nodded. "When I got pregnant, I thought I could do it alone. But then my parents kicked me out too. I had no job, no home. I had to give him up. It was the hardest thing I've ever done." She wiped a tear. "They told me I'd forget. But they were wrong." Malik's throat tightened. "Did you ever try to find him?" "I did. Over and over. But the records were sealed. Every door I knocked on stayed closed." She sighed, looking out the window. "Sometimes I wondered if he hated me for it." Malik couldn't take it anymore. "He didn't," he said suddenly. "He couldn't." Grace turned to him, puzzled. "How do you know?" He forced a small smile. "Because I just know what it's like, to want to be found." The next day, Grace was strong enough to walk down the hallway with a nurse's help. Malik joined her, pushing her for a stand. They passed by the children's wing. Grace stopped to watch a little boy playing with toy cars. "He looks like my son used to," she murmured. Malik smiled. "You remember that far back?" She nodded. "Every detail. His little dimples. The way his hair curled when it got wet." She glanced at Malik. "Kind of like yours." He laughed nervously. "Guess that's just coincidence." But inside, the walls around his heart were crumbling. 2 days later, Nurse Ellie handed him a sealed envelope. "Your test came back," she whispered. Malik stared at it, palms sweaty. He could open it right there, but his heart wasn't ready. He slid it into his jacket pocket, telling himself he'd look later. That evening, Grace told him she'd been praying for a miracle. "If I could just see my boy again," she said softly, "I'd tell him I'm sorry. For everything. For not fighting harder. For letting the world scare me." Malik's voice cracked. "He'd forgive you." She looked up. "You think so?" He nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "Yeah. He would." Grace reached out and squeezed his hand. "You remind me of him more every day." He smiled through the ache. "Maybe that's why I was there that night." That night, Malik sat on a park bench under a flickering streetlight, envelope still unopened. He whispered to himself, "What if it's true? What if she really is my mother?" The wind rustled the trees, whispering like a voice from the past. He pulled the letter close to his chest and took a deep breath. Tomorrow, he decided. Tomorrow, he'd face the truth, no matter what it said. The morning sun had barely risen when Malik stood outside the hospital once again, that familiar hum of city life echoing around him. Cars rushed past, people hurried by, but to him, everything felt like slow motion. Inside his jacket pocket was that small white envelope, the one that could change his entire life. He'd carried it for 2 days now, unopened. Because once you open something like that, you can't close it again. He walked inside, his boots heavy against the linoleum floor. The smell of disinfectant, the quiet beeps of monitors, it was all starting to feel like home. He waved at Nurse Ellie, who smiled knowingly. "Morning, hero," she said. "Morning," he replied, his voice distant. In room 312, Grace sat by the window, her head wrapped in a soft blue scarf, her hands holding a small Bible. When she saw Malik, her face brightened. "There you are," she said warmly. "Didn't think you'd show up today. Wouldn't miss it," he said, forcing a smile. She studied his face. "You look tired. Didn't sleep much?" Grace nodded. "Dreams can do that." Especially the kind that chase you. Malik chuckled softly. Yeah, something like that. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the faint chatter outside the door. Then Grace said, You know, I've been thinking about that night. About you. Me? Malik asked. She nodded. You didn't just save my life. You gave me hope again. It's funny, you remind me so much of the boy I lost. The way you talk, the way you care. Malik's throat tightened. You really think so? Grace smiled faintly. I don't just think so, Malik. I feel it. Later that day, Malik found himself sitting in his truck in the hospital parking lot. The envelope lay on the dashboard, glaring at him in silence. The rain began again, soft at first, then harder, just like that night. He reached for it with trembling fingers. His breath caught as he tore it open. Inside was a single sheet. 2 words leapt out at him like a thunderclap. Probability of maternity, 99.99%. Malik froze. His hands shook. His heart raced so fast he thought it would burst. He whispered the words under his breath, over and over. She's my mother, she's my mother. For a moment, he just sat there, numb, overwhelmed, and speechless. All those years of wondering, of searching faces that looked like his, had led here. To a stranger he'd saved from death, who wasn't a stranger at all. Tears streamed down his face. He leaned against the steering wheel, sobbing quietly, not from pain this time, but from something deeper. Relief. He stayed there for minutes, maybe hours. Then, when he finally gathered himself, he whispered, She deserves to know. When he walked into her room, Grace was sitting up, knitting with trembling hands. She looked up, smiling. You look different today, she said. Lighter somehow. Malik took a deep breath. Grace, there's something I need to tell you. Her smile faded slightly. What is it, dear? He pulled the paper from his pocket, unfolded it carefully, and handed it to her. She looked at it, confused at first, then trembling as her eyes moved down the page. Her knitting dropped to the floor. Her lips parted. No, this can't be. Malik's eyes welled up. It's true. Grace pressed a hand to her mouth. Malik. She said his name like it was both a prayer and a wound. I thought I'd never see you again. He nodded, tears streaming freely now. I didn't know who you were that night. But I couldn't leave you there. Something in me, I don't know, something told me I had to help. Grace reached out with shaking hands, touching his face like she was seeing a ghost. You look just like your father, she whispered. Oh God! Malik, I'm so sorry. He took her hand gently. You don't have to be sorry. But Grace broke down, sobbing into her palms. I left you. I should have fought harder. I should have found a way. Malik knelt by her bedside, holding her tight. You did what you had to do to survive. I get that now. I do. She shook her head, crying harder. You have every right to hate me. He looked up at her, eyes burning with emotion. I don't hate you. I saved you, remember? Maybe that's how God brought us back together. For a long time, they just held each other. Decades of pain, separation, and longing, all collapsing into one moment of forgiveness. When the nurse walked in, she quietly turned around and left. Some things were too sacred to interrupt. After a while, Grace whispered, I used to dream about this. Every year on your birthday, I'd imagine what you looked like. Where you were. If you were okay. Malik smiled through tears. And I used to wonder if anyone out there was looking for me. Grace brushed his cheek. I never stopped. Later, as the evening sun poured golden light into the room, Grace said, Do you know what's funny? Malik raised a brow. What? The night you saved me. I thought it was the end of my life. He smiled softly. Turns out it was the beginning of mine. They both laughed through their tears, the kind of laughter that only comes from healing. That night, Malik drove home feeling like a different man. The city lights blurred through the windshield, and for the first time, he didn't feel lost. He thought about Grace, her courage, her pain, her survival. He thought about fate, and how sometimes it didn't make sense until it did. He parked his truck, leaned back, and looked up at the stars. "Thanks, Mom," he whispered, "for fighting your way back." The next day, when he walked into the hospital, Grace greeted him with a framed photo, the only baby picture she ever kept. Tiny Malik, wrapped in a blue blanket. She smiled. "I want you to have this." He took it, tears glimmering again. "I've waited my whole life for this picture." Grace reached out. "And I've waited my whole life to give it to you." They sat there, mother and son, hand in hand. The storm that once tore them apart had finally brought them back together. A week had passed since the truth came out. And yet, every morning, Malik still woke up half expecting it to be a dream. But then, his phone would buzz. "Good morning, son Red Heart." A message from Grace. 2 words he never thought he'd read. 2 words that changed everything. Grace was healing, both in body and soul. Her stitches had been removed, and she could finally walk short distances again. But more than her body, it was her spirit that seemed to bloom. She smiled more, laughed often. And when she looked at Malik, her eyes carried both wonder and guilt, the weight of years lost, and the beauty of getting a second chance. One chilly afternoon, Malik helped her into his truck. The sky was overcast, the kind of gray that made memories feel heavier. Grace looked out the window, her voice soft. "Where are we going?" Malik glanced at her. "Home." She frowned lightly. "Home?" He nodded. "You'll see." They drove for hours, past city limits, into the countryside, the landscape shifting from steel to silence, from traffic lights to tall trees swaying in the wind. Grace sat quietly, her fingers brushing the windowpane. "I used to dream about the road back home," she whispered. "Never thought I'd actually see it again." Malik smiled faintly. "Well, today's the day." When they finally stopped, Grace's breath caught in her throat. Before them stood a small, abandoned church, its white paint chipped, its bell tower cracked but still standing proud. Malik stepped out first, helping her down. "This is where they found me," he said quietly. "Wrapped in a blanket, left by the front steps. Someone would take care of you. Someone better than me." Malik looked at her, no anger, no resentment. Just understanding. "You did what you thought was right." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "I came back the next morning, but you were gone. I never forgave myself." Malik placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to anymore." They walked up the steps together, the same ones she'd once left him on. Grace bent down slowly, running her fingers over the cracked stone. "I prayed here," she said, "that someone would love you enough for me." Malik's eyes glistened. "Someone did. And now, so do you." She looked up at him, tears spilling freely. "God works in strange ways, doesn't he?" He nodded. "Yeah, sometimes he hides miracles in the middle of chaos." They sat on the church steps, the afternoon sun spilling across the fields. Grace reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was old, yellowed, fragile. "This was the note I left with you," she said. Malik hesitated before taking it. In shaky handwriting it read, "To whoever finds my baby, please love him. His name is Malik. I can't give him the life he deserves, but I pray the world will." He read it again and again, tears falling onto the paper. Then he looked up at her, voice breaking. "You gave me a name, you gave me a start. That's more than enough." Grace smiled weakly. "And you gave me a reason to live again." The wind picked up, rustling the trees around them. For a while either spoke. It was as if time itself paused, just to let them breathe, just to let them exist in this moment of grace. Then Malik said, "I've been thinking, maybe we can rebuild this place." Grace turned to him, surprised. "The church?" "Yeah. As a community center. For foster kids, single moms, people who feel forgotten." Her eyes widened, filling again with tears. "You want to turn our pain into purpose." He nodded. "That's what you taught me." Grace smiled through her tears. Then let's do it, son. Weeks passed. The old church began to transform. New paint, repaired windows, flowers growing again by the steps. Locals came together to help. Some brought tools, others food. Everyone felt the pull of the story, the mother who lost her son, and the son who found her again. They named it the Grace House. And every Sunday, kids from the foster system gathered there, eating, laughing, learning, being loved. Grace would sit by the door, greeting each child with the same warmth she wished she'd once given her own. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Malik stood beside his mother, watching the children play. Grace leaned on her cane, smiling softly. You know, she said, sometimes God doesn't answer prayers right away. Sometimes He makes you wait, until the moment it'll mean the most. Malik looked at her, eyes warm. And sometimes He lets you crash into the answer without even knowing it. Grace laughed, a real, joyful laugh. Crash, huh? You've got a way with words. He grinned. Guess I got that from you. As night fell, Malik helped her to the steps again. They sat where it all began, where heartbreak had once lived, now replaced by healing. Grace looked up at the stars. I don't know how much time I have left, but I'm grateful I get to spend it with you. Malik took her hand gently. We've got time, Mom. A lifetime's worth to make up for. She smiled, tears glimmering. Then let's start right here. They held hands as the church bell rang, not a funeral toll this time, but a melody of rebirth. The woman who had lost everything. The man who saved a stranger. Both had found exactly what they needed, in each other.